In this workout, we're going to go through the rib cage, all the joints of the ribs and the space between the ribs. But let's start out just by settling in. So however you're coming to your practice today, whether it's whatever else was going on before you started to practice, one of the biggest things you can do to improve the quality of the practice session is to just give a buffer. And what I mean is, when you go to start right now, feel the whole body. And don't immediately try to go into dissolving or feeling a gate or even really forcing yourself to align the joints or anything that you know how to do. Give a buffer where you have no expectations. You're just feeling, seeing what's there. You might feel the residue of the day and whatever you were just talking about with somebody or whatever you were just doing. Maybe you're just waking up. And have this kind of zero expectation moment where it's like you just walk into a room and you're getting oriented in the room. Just come into your posture very loosely. So as simple as possible. A little bit of bend in the legs, loose feeling in the arms. And without forcing it, just lengthen through the spine. And as you're settling, try to have as little agenda as possible for what you're going to do to settle in. Some days it may be, you might feel really deep inside the body right away. Some days you'll have more blank spots when you go to feel. You can't feel what's going on. But just take this first minute or two to land and arrive with the practice and see how that feels. Now, letting the weight drift into the feet. Start to make your adjustments from the bottom up. Start to settle from the bottom up. Letting the feet spread a little bit. Already starting to soften the contact with the ground. And if you keep this in mind, if you let the feet and the floor sort of have the smoothest integration as possible, the least sense of standing on the floor and a stronger sense of kind of melting into the floor, softening into the floor, you can actually use that to calibrate everything above the feet. So just as you're feeling it, adjusting slightly the knees, the hips, the quad, the back, the shoulders, until you feel like the body has a smooth and easy connection to the ground. Now, as you feel up to the crown of the head, we can settle into the gates and all the familiar territory that we've been dissolving and working with. So finding the crown of the head. And seeing today how light your touch needs to be in order to connect to it and feel the difference between the physical sensations and the energetic sensations in the gate itself. And with that same lightness, moving down now to the temples and the third eye. And then down through the eyes, the gates behind the eyes. If you have a lot of visual tension or you feel like you can't release the eyes, really try to feel behind them so you feel where the eyeball sits in the socket and get a sense for the back of that space, and that actual sort of indirectly, instead of trying to go through the eye and relax the whole eye, by feeling behind it, you can often help it release much easier. And then down through the ears and the jaw. Feeling the roof of the mouth, the base of the skull. And remember, as you come down through the neck and throat together, it's really easy in the neck to try to make a lot of physical adjustments to release muscle and sense of holding, and you might find yourself fidgeting around more to try to get that sense of relaxation in the muscles. It's not quite what we're doing. Some of that may happen, but as you feel into it, regardless of whether you need to make an adjustment or not, try to feel directly into the spaces of the, you have to feel the neck itself, but feel the spaces between the vertebrae. Try to get a sense for that. And then the dissolving process, as you become more familiar with it, is just holding it so you can sense the energy that binds that physicality in place. So it's very different from the kind of normal doing, releasing, relaxing from a nerve and a muscle point of view. And that sense of energetic resolution is a little more subtle, and it comes from just sort of holding the mind there in the right way. So this can be a tricky process because you're not doing the same way that you're used to doing. So as you go through the neck, try to feel all those things. And coming all the way down to the base of the neck and the throat notch. Now we're going to go out to the shoulders and down the arms before we work through the ribs. So just feeling the big joints of the shoulder, the gates that surround it at the tip of the shoulder, underneath the shoulder blade, and the shoulder's nest. And from those outer gates, feel in towards the center gate. Now from the shoulders, coming down to the elbows. So all of the 10 little minor gates around the elbow before you feel into the center. And remember, that's just the surface. So the crook of the elbow above and below, the tip of the elbow above and below, and the inside and outside of the elbow. Now through the wrists, a sense of releasing anything through the elbows that's been accumulating there. Drop it down to the wrist, feel what's in the wrist. And feel how all the little gates in the wrist around this periphery support a more thorough opening and a more whole opening of the gate in the center. So if there's a surface you can't feel around the wrist, if it's collapsed inward or closed in the front of the wrist or the back of the wrist, feel how that shuts down the space inside the wrist as well. And see if you can get that to open up. And then continue from the wrist out through the hands, the palms, the center of the back of the hand, the spaces between the bones, and joint by joint out to the tips of the fingers. From the tips of the fingers now, feel back up to the shoulder blades. We want to start to get a sense of the space between the shoulder blades, because not only will this help us unlock the rib cage, but it's an important juncture to release the energy through the arms. It helps us connect the arms out to the spine. So from the inside borders of the blades, sort of in a channel or a zone, feel the whole area between the blades. And as you rest your mind there, you may find it helpful to focus on the exact middle of that area, specifically around the spine at that height. There'll be a big gate in the vertebrae, and the vertebra right in the center. So sort of mid-thoracic. And just see what you can feel resting the mind between the blades for a minute. And as you feel the layers there, as you get more comfortable resting the mind there, you can also start to feel in around the spine. And if you can identify or start to feel where the ribs kind of come into the spine, in the back, they'll attach in, and then we want to feel all the way around to the front. We want to feel the sides of the rib cage, and it's harder to feel how the joints move in the front, and they move just a tiny little bit. But into the sternum, how the ribs connect in there becomes important. So starting this process out, sort of you sort of feel up under the armpits. The ribs go all the way up till under your collarbone. So from the collarbone, the shoulder blades, the armpits, just try to feel the upper section of the rib cage and see if you can get the shape of it. This is a similar process to working with the neck and the vertebrae of the neck, where it's trying to feel the difference between the bones and the spaces between the bones. So just for a minute or two with the upper section, see if you can feel how the ribs come into the breastbone, how they come under the collarbone, around under the shoulder blades, and into the spine. Feeling for the bones and the spaces between the bones as well. then height by height, rib by rib, we want to start feeling down through the whole rib cage, noticing the space between them, the joints where they attach to the chest and to the spine. And for women, as you come down, there's a gate that you also want to pay attention to, try to feel and dissolve in the center of the breast. So let's just take a few minutes and height by height come down through the rib cage. One of the things that's often tricky about this is that due to the curve of the ribs, it's easy to feel lower through the body, faster at the sides than it is to feel in the chest and the breastbone or the back. So if you just sort of, instead of thinking totally like water draining out from underneath you and each level coming down, go rib by rib. Try to feel with your mind along the rib. Just like you were walking into a dark cave and you needed to feel along the wall to make your way through the cave. See if you can find that. Sometimes it's easier to feel from the outside. Sometimes when you're getting a sense for the rib cage, it's easier to have a sense for the inside of the rib cage. And you might notice that that gives you a sense of the shape and the fullness of the rib cage if you approach it that way. So continuing on down, we're not going to do the solar plexus in this workout, but just try to come to the bottom third of the rib cage now. Trying to find a sense, as things dissolve, a sense of stillness in the release of the energy. And this will happen if you hold the mind in the right way, if you feel around you and feel that you're not getting enmeshed and wrestling with whatever feels like it's releasing. So when it turns from movement and release to quiet and stillness, you know you've done a lot of the good dissolving work. So now, sinking down the rest of the way from the diaphragm, the solar plexus, the lower back, everything between the bottom of the rib cage and the bowl of the pelvis. Just take a minute to let the mind drop through that area. Now we're shifting from dissolving to sinking to try to flush the rest of the system out. So through the whole belly, the spine, the front of the spine, everything feels like it's dropping and releasing down into the pelvis, the hip joints, the sacrum, and increasing the sense of weight dropping through the legs. Letting the weight fall into the upper thighs, and then height by height, as if the energy's draining down the legs. Whatever didn't release above in the dissolving, if you can have a sense of that draining down and sinking down through you, that's a nice way to complete each standing process. So coming down through the whole thigh, getting that cumulative sense of dropping and releasing without shutting down the joints. So make sure your knee has a sense of space and openness. And then through the shins and calves. And down through the ankles and feet. As your ankles release, as the feet open up, returning to where we started with just trying to feel that interface between the feet and the floor. Letting it soften and sink in so you get connected all the way down. And then just having that sense that everything from the crown of the head down through the feet, as the drop, release, just let everything in the body go quiet. And that's how you finish. Good job.